She's Jori Epstein. He's Frank Schwab. I'm Jason Fitz. It's Inside Coverage. I promise, guys, I won't spend the whole episode on a high still, but I am still on a high because my beloved Raiders got a victory. I don't know. Something about week 2, Frank, just felt different. You tell me. I don't know what it is. I just feel like I got the joy down in my heart as we get ready for this episode.
I'm glad you do. But we sit here, as we talked about Sunday night, knowing nothing about the NFL. Like, we should just stare blankly at each other for an hour because, look, I'm as confused as I've ever been on who's good, who's not. Obviously, I heard from a lot of people about my power rankings this week. I will talk about that later. But yes, you bask in that glory because it's all going to change by week 3, and then it'll all change in week 4, and it'll all change in week 5. Like, it's just, the NFL right now is just an Etch-a-Sketch. You just turn it over, you shake it a little bit, and it all erases. There's no continuity yet, and it's part of what makes the NFL so fun and crazy. I mean, look, 2/3 of Survivor pool picks are already done, and we're in week 2. It's absolutely wild.
I know. I understand, Fitz, that you're playing the Panthers this week, and that is encouraging for you, but I think you beat the wrong AFC contender if you really want to make it all the way. Like, you have not beat the Chiefs yet. Calm down.
Okay, but look, there was never a part of this where I thought that suddenly the season was going to go to like 11 wins, Jori. I mean, you're right to calm down, and by the way,
you did beat them within the last 12 months. I'll give you that.
Thank you. You know, one Chiefs win every 3 years. That's all I'm asking for at this point. Look, I got nothing can kill my joy. Even the hate. I'm drinking your haterade. Bring it on. Carolina, though, I'm not wildly confident against because I've watched the Raiders blow games that they shouldn't blow against bad quarterbacks and bad teams. So I feel like, I am cautiously optimistic, but Carolina in the news for big reasons. Let's get straight to it as we take a look at some of the biggest stories and some of the bullish or bearish on quarterbacks on new teams, because frankly, Bryce Young was somebody this year that came in with expectations. Now, after not playing in the preseason and after only playing 2 games, he has been benched by the Carolina Panthers. Let's start with the decision, Jori. How surprised were you by the decision by the Panthers to bench him after 2 games?
Yeah, I was definitely surprised. I was talking to sources around the league on Monday, and the way one put it to me is, at first I thought Tom Pelissero's name must be spelled wrong when I saw the report. Like, people thought this was a fake report. At least this person did. I think what's crazy about this is that, okay, if you were to tell me last year, 2023, they draft him first overall and they say, let's give him time, completely defensible, probably even what would have been the smart move. I know our colleague Charles Robinson talked about that this week in his column, but I think you say, yeah, this team was not ready to support him. Okay, then if you were to say, you know what, going into year 2, we're not going to start him out at the beginning, it would have been a little bit questionable for his confidence, but at least you're not then benching him. Now you're benching him. You have to ask about his confidence. You have to ask about the Carolina Panthers' belief in him. And you have to ask, like, how does Bryce Young come back from this? I think there are some in the league who are saying, you know what? He doesn't have the physical tools that he needs to succeed in this league. Someone like Kyler Murray might also be small, but look what his arm talent is compared to Bryce's. And you have other people in the league saying you can ruin a quarterback really quickly if you don't give him the infrastructure around him. One thing I think is interesting is that there's definitely a lot of people around the league pointing to team owner David Tepper's involvement, but I talked to someone with some knowledge of this situation, and they were a little more hesitant to put the blame or credit, however you want to call it, on David Tepper, because what this person was telling me is, okay, yes, anything that happens in the Carolina Panthers is like indirectly related to David Tepper and the culture he has created, but when you look at Dave Canales and trying to build a culture with a new team, at some point you have to look yourself in the eye and say, is this quarterback going to give us a chance to win, much less a good chance? And if not, how do I get up in front of the rest of the locker room and say, we are all accountable and we're all doing what we need to be doing to win? I mean, I think back again, I talk about it all the time. Robert Saleh with the Jets last year saying that it wasn't on Zach Wilson. Everyone had to play better around him. And it was just not a credible message. And so while on one hand, I think that the Panthers are taking a pretty big loss if they're admitting that the Bryce Young goal did not work out, I also respect what David Canales is doing, saying like, hey, this might be the decision that we need to do as a team so that in my first year as head coach, I don't completely lose the rest of the locker room, even if I lose the quarterback who, by the way, was drafted and analyzed before I got to this organization.
I think it's, you have to bring in Tepper at some point. I mean, this is going to be, if Andy Dalton plays enough games, the 7th time a different quarterback has led the Panthers in passing, and David Tepper 7 years as owner, which is just absolutely crazy. And you thought Bryce Young was going to be the first guy to repeat, but apparently not. It's surprising to me for two reasons, obviously. I mean, just 2 games into the season, and you're not going anywhere. I mean, it's not like the Panthers are like, our season is going to get derailed. We're not going to make the playoffs if we don't make a move right now. Well, you're not going to make the playoffs anyway. Like, let's be realistic here. And second, I think part of this is Bryce, there's never been a question about Bryce Young's professionalism. He's not doing bad things off the field. By all accounts, he's great that way, right? Like he puts in work, he good citizen, all that kind of stuff, right? Like, so it's not like something where you're just like, this guy is not representing us very well. We're sick of him. We're sick of his work habits. He's just not playing well. And so I could understand more if it was a Jamarcus Russell situation where you're like, this guy is just not putting in any work and we can't count on him and he's just unprofessional. I think it's just shocking in that way that it's just a straight performance issue. Well, he has been bad. It is just 2 games into his second year. I mean, you had to give him a little more time on a team that obviously is not going to the playoffs. Obviously is in a running for the first pick. Probably will get the first pick. That's why it surprised me more than anything is just, I think they should have given him more time, but I get it too. At the same, you're not there yet. And maybe they're just saying internally, take a seat. We shouldn't have played you last year. Well, let's sit you this year. Let's let you learn. Let's maybe get you on a Jordan Love track where you can sit, learn, play, and then you're much better. I don't know. I don't know what the end game here is for the Panthers. I just know that, man, this is such an admit of defeat. It is, you picked the wrong guy. You traded up. You traded the world to go up to number 1, and then you picked the wrong guy. CJ Stroud, you watch him on Sunday night, and you're like, this dude is like Dan Marino 2.0. I mean, he is
Stroud's
so
performance
good.
Definitely influences this decision with the contrast.
Absolutely.
I think part of this,
it's just hard.
So let's go back to a couple of things here. If you look back to when he was drafted, I was covering that year for the draft for ESPN. The one knock that people around Alabama would tell you that Bryce Young had coming into the pros was pre-snap defensive recognition and blitz recognition. Doesn't do a great job of communicating to the offensive line some of the things that are coming to him. That was the one knock I repeatedly heard in my draft prep. You've seen that in the pros. Now, I think Carolina did what they thought would help with that by bringing in some veteran offensive linemen in front of him, taking some things off his plate, trying to help him be a better quarterback. I understand the logic behind that. The reason, no matter where we are today, the reason that this is squarely David Tepper's fault isn't because he's been benched. It's because he's been ruined. We have no idea what Bryce Young's going to look like, but we do know that the wrong coach in Frank Reich was hired. We know that that coach was then fired and another coach was brought in. So you've asked your rookie quarterback in the span of a year to work with a bunch of different voices and a bunch of different coaches and a bunch of different people all around the organization. That's why this is David Tepper's fault. Look, I don't think an owner should be squarely responsible for identifying a great quarterback. They own a team. That doesn't make them a great football mind. That makes them a businessman that was willing to get the money to put together a football team. That's fine. Where David Tepper does specifically have responsibility is whoever is hired to work with Bryce Young is his responsibility. So if Bryce Young has been ruined and can't play, if the Panthers have destroyed this young man, or if they misanalyzed him, all of that would come down to the people that David Tepper hired who didn't do their job efficiently, which is why this is all his fault.
Which, I mean, I also think there are a lot of people around the league who feel pretty strongly that it was a David Tepper pick and that he was the one who said Bryce is our guy. And so I think on one hand, you got to give him the appropriate blame for that. And on the other hand, someone pointed out to me, in the business world, he's dealt with sunk costs before. And so what do you do when you have what they believe is a sunk cost? Now, again, I think it's a sunk cost because they sank it. I think the Panthers were the ones who, if you could say ruin Bryce Young, I think it's probably a little early for that, but they certainly have wrecked him for the short and medium term. And I think that then you say, okay, well, if he's not our guy, what? At first, I thought this was crazy because I'm like, well, even if you don't think he's your guy, don't you want to try and get the first overall draft pick or some very high draft pick to replace him? And I also think that schematically, shouldn't you be able to do something to help him out a little more? I feel the same way with Chicago. I think there are these teams around the league where you need to understand if you're going to start a quarterback sooner than historically we saw quarterbacks starting, that you need to help them out and not just assume they're going to figure it out on their own. But I do think there's something to be said for if Bryce is not going to be their guy, now what? How do you move forward? And at what point do you move forward? And I also thought it was interesting. I watched the players' interviews after, and on defense, it was a little less emotional. But I mean, Tommy Tremble, their tight end, really was like, we let him down. And it's really hard to see that we weren't enough for this quarterback and now he lost his job. And so I do think that this is going to spark something in the team, but it needs to be channeled appropriately.
If I could ask you guys, because I think this is important for the conversation and where we're at with Bryce Young. Do either of you guys think Bryce Young is their voluntary, I guess I'd put it, starter at any point the rest of the year? At any point, do they say, okay, we're going back to Bryce Young to start some games? I mean, Andy Dalton is not a bad quarterback. He looked pretty good with the 2022 Saints in his last time really being the guy somewhere. Do you think at any point this year, Bryce Young is their preferred starter in games? Not just Andy Dalton got hurt and you got to start Bryce Young, but do they go back to him? And I guess the follow-up to that is, if you don't think it's this year, do you think Bryce Young ever starts a game for the Carolina Panthers again?
No, it's a great question. I was asking people that when I was at Monday Night Football this week. Do you think Bryce Young's next start will come with the Panthers, with another team, or not at all? I think in terms of this year, I would be surprised if Andy was 100% healthy, or as close to 100% as you can be in a violent game like football, if Bryce starts again. But I think if there's something where he gets a little tweaked and then you feel like Bryce has made some progress, you have a little more of an ability to say like, hey, Andy's not 100%, we're going to bring Bryce back. Like, I think that's where the gray area is to me. But I do think it's interesting because on one hand, you look at quarterbacks who struggled in Carolina, and Sam Darnold, who's now 2-0 with the Minnesota Vikings, Baker Mayfield, who's now 2-0 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think what I struggle with, though, is those quarterbacks came to Carolina after they had played and had at least some degree of success, varying between them, but some degree of success previously. And so they could point to that success when they were trying to reclaim themselves. It's hard when you've never seen success at the NFL level. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like this is more of like, okay, is this a Trey Lance situation? In which case, like, is there a team that'll give up a 4th or 5th for him if you're going to go somewhere else? But Fitz, what do you think? Do you think that Bryce starts another game for the Panthers this year?
I don't think he starts a game for the Panthers this year, but I do think he still has value for every reason you just said. The Darnold and Baker thing is on a lot of people's minds. The best situation for Bryce right now would be to get traded somewhere in a Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, I should say, type offense where he can be a backup.
Even Mike, who knows?
And Mike, yeah. He
know.
can go into a Shanahan offense. He can just sit back for a year. He can learn. He can play to his strengths. He can get a little bit of confidence back, and then he can work his way back into the league. It's still too quarterback hungry of a league for me to think the Price is done. I just have a hard time. I can't remember. And Frank, you're the best historian of all of us. You tell me a time when a #1 overall pick was benched, came back, and had a Hall of Fame level career. Because I just don't think I can't think of an instance that's happened.
Oh, Terry Bradshaw. I mean,
okay.
Terry Bradshaw early
when
in
was
his career.
Drew Brees benched?
Drew Brees, yes. Drew Brees was
benched for injury though. Like he was like
yeah,
Drew Brees.
No, he was pretty bad early on with the Chargers. Got benched for Doug Flutie at some point. He wasn't the kind of. But yes, that's a great comp too. But Terry Bradshaw. I mean, this is ancient history. I get that. But early in his career, he was benched a few times. I think Gilliam was their starter for a while, even in their first Super Bowl season in '74. And Bradshaw obviously went on to have a Hall of Fame career, but that's the outlier. That type of story doesn't happen very often, especially in this NFL where everything's in a microwave. You can't afford 3, 4, 5 years down the road to be trying out a guy. I do think Bryce Young starts late in the year because the Panthers are going to be bad. I think actually they're going to be a lot better with Andy Dalton. Again, Andy Dalton's a competent quarterback. I think that you know, sorry, Fitz, they're going to be pretty fired up after this. Like everybody's got to take accountability. Like you talked about Tremble, taking around responsibility. This shakes up an entire organization. And if you can't get up after your quarterback just got benched after 2 games and play a little bit better, play a little harder for a veteran who has been a competent quarterback, then there's just a flat line. Then you're just going nowhere this year. So I think the Panthers are actually going to play pretty well with Dalton, but by the end of the year, they're going to be 3-11 or whatever they're going to be, and they have to get a look at Bryce Young before the end of the year. They have to know, is there anything salvageable here before we go into this draft where you're probably going to have the first pick? So I think Young does start late in the year, but yeah, it's not good for. It looks so bleak for his career right now, and it sucks because again, he's a guy you root for. He was a great player at Alabama. Again, by all accounts, a really professional, good dude, all that kind of stuff. Like I mean, there's nothing that says Bryce Young is a guy you don't want to root for. It just has not happened for him yet, and it's kind of a sad story to this point.
Dave Canales was asked about the decision and if David Tepper was involved in the decision. This is what Canales said. You guys hear it. Tell me if you believe it.
I want to keep that private. What I would like to say, though, is this is something after I watched the film, I looked at it, had a thought, started working on talking to the guys that we make decisions with. Certainly a lot of parties involved there. And ultimately this comes on me, and my #1 responsibility is to help the Panthers win. And so this move, I believe, puts us in the best chance to do that this week.
Jori, what the hell does all that mean?
Can I tell you, I was going into that. I watched this press conference yesterday on the train back from Philadelphia, thinking I was going to be like rolling my eyes. And I actually respected it. Like, tell me if you guys just totally disagree with it. Maybe I'm too charitable in my interpretation. But again, after watching so many coaches get up and say things they just do not believe, I was like, look, I do think that Dave Canales believes this is the best decision for the Carolina Panthers, whether he was the first person to come up with the idea or the third person to come up with this idea. I also think that there was just sort of like, this sounds so stupid, but like a maturity and sort of like comfort level with his decision and with the way he answered questions. Like, yes, as a reporter, it's annoying that he was deflecting questions so masterfully, but I'm also like, the Carolina Panthers need an adult in the room. And I'm not saying that Frank Reich or the staff, like, in a vacuum weren't adults, but there were almost too many adults in the room last year, and they need an adult in the room this year. And I kind of think he's doing that in this situation. Do you guys completely disagree with me?
I don't necessarily disagree. I thought he handled it the only way you can. Like, it's a very hard question to answer, because if you answer, oh yeah, David brought me up into his office and he told me Bryce Young's being benched, like, then that just follows you around forever. I mean, Frank Reich made one comment last year about how he had difficult conversations with David Tepper about the football team, and that kind of stuck until he got fired. And so, I mean, a decision doesn't get made like this without David Tepper. Like,
I agree with that.
Like, this isn't benching.
It shouldn't.
But what if David
without,
Tepper pulls Dave Canales into his office and says, is Bryce Young the best quarterback for us to win games now? Because I think the question is, like, we view this as trying to get Bryce on the macro level to work because of what he means to the Panthers organization in terms of how much they gave up for him. But what if David Tepper says, look, I have fans with bags over their heads. I have fans booing. I don't like this. And my goal right now is to win games, to win a game, and then move from there. Who is the best quarterback for that decision? I do think that's defensible, even if it's a little bit of a bold move.
It's also his money, guys. Like, I know we sit here and we'd love to just trash owners, but like, how many people listening, right? If you've ever hired a handyman, you got a lawn guy, whatever, like, you may not know how to do the job, but you know if the job's not being done right. And how angry does somebody get if they're at a restaurant and they don't like the food that comes out to them? They're like, I paid for this. Like, but then we look at billionaire owners and say, well, stop meddling. I mean, David Tepper put a lot of money into Bryce Young. I think it's okay for the guy that's writing $20 million checks to turn around and be like, hey, question, I spent a lot of money here. Is this working? Like, I just don't think that's the evil that we want to make it out as you know, media and fans.
Okay. The man did throw a drink on fans and then, like, take a guy's hat off in a convenience store.
And
so I don't think we have to give him all of the credit, but I do agree. I think that he has lost some of his credibility. Also, I've been thinking about this for like a day now. Have you guys ever worn a paper bag over your head? And would you ever do that? Like, that is just something special.
I've had people ask me to do it. I mean, you know.
No, like, I don't really understand wearing, like, then I can't talk to people. I can't hear people talking to me. I can't easily eat.
It seems a lot worse for the person wearing the bag than for the team owner. I mean, hey, if that's what changed the team owner, then, like, credit to those fans for taking a stand. Maybe it did work and got a different quarterback.
The minute I walk into a stadium, I'm hungry. Like, no matter what, even if I've eaten right before I walk into a stadium, the smell of a stadium makes me hungry. I'm still trying to figure out how you eat a hot dog with a paper bag.
Well, yeah, would you eat under the bag or cut a hole so that you'd eat the hot dog? I don't know.
Also, that's if it rains, then you have a soggy paper bag on you. Like, that just, I've had plastic trash bags with me at games for, like, rain purposes, but.
Oh, you carry like trash bags everywhere to each game?
So, I mean,
I went to one game when it was Kansas State at Texas when I was in undergrad. And it was just pouring. And so we all just brought trash bags to try and not get completely soaked. And they realized we were just going to get completely soaked.
So speaking of trash bags, let me ask you this. Because let's remember.
What a segue. That was maybe your best one.
Thanks so much. Let's remember that the Carolina Panthers selected Bryce Young with the first overall pick. Right? And we all know that. And then they earned the first overall pick last year. And now they may earn the first overall pick again. I know there's trades involved in all of this, but when you think about a level of ineptitude, when you talk about 3 straight years being in proximity or having the first overall pick in the draft, I can't find any major sport where one team has held the first pick in 3 consecutive years. I can't find any time in history it's ever happened anywhere. Now, the lottery makes the NBA a little different. I don't trust the process. We can all agree the 76ers sucked during that process. But is this the worst 3-year period we've ever seen for any team in sports? Because, like, the NFL is built for mediocrity. To be this bad, this long for a 3rd straight year. Frank, again, you're our historian here. How does this compare to other 3-year periods of just awful suck?
I'm looking up Hugh Jackson's career because they had a really rough go of it when he was with the Cleveland Browns. That's one that comes to mind when they went winless the one season. He got fired. Obviously, I think he was 3-34 at some point. Like I think that's the bar that's set for the Carolina Panthers. But also,
weren't
no
the Browns
turning around?
The Browns were doing that
intentionally. This doesn't go on for another 2 years, right? Like the Carolina Panthers could be bad through 2026 at this point. Like this is not like, oh, there's a light at the end of the tunnel in 2025. Like not really. You gave up so much draft capital to get Bryce Young that those picks, those picks that they gave up became Caleb Williams, Javon Carter, Tyreek Stevenson, who's a really, really good cornerback for the Bears right now. DJ Moore, they just traded him in that trade. They gave up a ton to get Bryce Young. This is not just picking the wrong guy like the Raiders did with Jamarcus Russell, right?
Two Jamarcus Russell's references.
This is also giving up a ton to pick the wrong guy, which complicates things. And yeah, it's rough. It's just bad for the Panthers right now.
I think the problem is they might say, okay, we picked the wrong guy. We need to do something about it. And I admire that they would not want to just continue to try and make the wrong decision, let's say, work if they've decided it's not going to. But if that's the case, you got to take responsibility for how you got to that decision-making part at the beginning.
The only thing I'd say about the Browns, as terrible as it was, Hugh Jackson is alleged in lawsuits and everything else, that the Browns were intentionally trying to basically lose their way to the top. There is no indication that the Panthers are being intentional. The Panthers are trying to win football games. They're just not doing a good job of it. So I hear you, the Browns was worse, but at least the Browns were like, no, man, we're going to suck for a little bit and we're going to recalibrate the entire organization, which not for nothing may have actually worked for them a little bit through that process. This is Carolina putting their best foot forward. But it's also a lot
more defensible to the front office than it is to the players. I think we underrate, and this sounds silly, how much these players hate losing, especially if they know it's just going to come week after week after week. Dave Canales does not want to get up there and tell them but it's okay in 3 years when, hey, Adam Thielen, you're not going to be here anymore. Most likely, we'll be good then. Thanks for the sacrifice.
By the way, real quick, the 2015 to 2017 Browns. This is started 1 year before Hugh Jackson got there. 3-13, 1-15, 0-16, and with point differentials of -154, -188, -176. That is a pretty tough bar to get under, I guess, if you're the Panthers, but there's no reason they can't
here's the
that.
Here's the good news, Panthers fans. All I can say now is that you're in one of the worst three-year spots we've ever seen in the history of sports. That's just one of instead of this quarterback concern. I think plays a little bit forward to another quarterback though, because it's only 2 games. I'm not freaking out. Are you guys freaking out with Caleb Williams, who in week 1 against the Titans, obviously it was a game to forget. In week 2, there was a lot of it that was also we saw exactly the knock on Caleb, trying so hard to make plays off schedule, Frank, that it ended up hurting the Bears in this process. I think Bears fans a little frustrated because they expected essentially Jesus to come in and walk on water, and instead he's sinking as he tries.
Right. And we have to remember too that even the great CJ Stroud, he struggled in the preseason.
The great CJ Stroud.
He is.
Sounds like a bad magic act.
He is extremely talented, but we can't just let that go by without acknowledging
I am on the CJ Stroud bandwagon. He is awesome. He is as good of a quarterback as I've ever seen at this point in his career. He is incredible. He's going to be the guy that competes with Mahomes the next decade. I'm fully in. CJ Stroud is that dude. He is that dude. But even
CJ Stroud more of that dude than Joe Burrow to you?
Yes. Yes, honestly, yeah. I think I would take CJ Stroud over Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's great. But this is just how high I am on CJ Stroud. I think he's...
And also, I don't want to jinx anything, knock on all the woods, but Joe Burrow has not proven he could stay healthy, and that does not currently seem to be a CJ concern.
Right, and if you give me Joe Burrow has never had a major injury in the NFL. Maybe my answer is different, but I think it has set him back at least a little bit. I just love Stroud. If I'm picking guys right now, and I love Lamar, you know that, I'd probably have CJ Stroud as my QB2 right now. If I'm redrafting the entire NFL, the first pick's obvious. The second pick, I'd probably pick CJ Stroud. That's how high. He's just great. But again, let me get to my point, guys.
Sorry.
My hyperbole over here. He struggled in the preseason, struggled the first couple weeks, I think, of last season. I'm going to have to go back and look, but I remember the first game at the Ravens. He wasn't very good. And it's just, I'm not freaking out about Caleb, but the one thing that I think definitely has to improve, and Fitz, you hit on this, he's trying to do too much, and which is the same thing he did at USC last year, where the coaching staff has to get it through to him. 3-step drop, ball's got to come out. Like not 3-step drop and you start running around trying to make a 50-yard play downfield. No, it's 3-step drop, hit DJ Moore on the slant. Like that's it. Like you're not having to do everything for the Chicago Bears right now. We have a good team around you. Just run the offense. And there's going to be times when he plays off schedule, but that has to come kind of organically. He's trying to do it too much right now. And I think that's really setting back the Bears offense. They're not on schedule a lot of times. We got away from the sack and just tried heaving it downfield 40 yards to commit. 3 Texans are there. In the NFL, that's going to get picked off. Like you're not playing UCLA's defense like that. That's going to get picked off in the NFL. So I just think with Williams, it's a learning process. He's fine. He's going to be really, really good. It's just getting through to him. Don't do too much. The ball's got to come out. Like he was pressured, I think 26 times, 29 times, 31, whatever crazy number it was. Yes, the offensive line didn't play well, but a lot of that was on Caleb Williams holding the ball too long.
Yeah, no, I think it's totally fair. One of the things that Rams general manager Les Snead likes to talk about is that when you are analyzing quarterbacks coming out of the draft, you are trying to project, hey, here's what they did at video game level 1, 2, whatever it is. Now we're trying to project that to another level of the video game with different windows to throw in to do different speed, different athleticism. And so we are trying to project a skill set in a completely different scenario. And I think that in some ways, Caleb Williams is still playing like he's at the other level of the video game rather than he's at this level of the video game. And while when I talk to people around the league and I'm like, is this offensive line just that much worse than we thought? A lot of them do point to Caleb and say, Caleb's play style invites that pressure. Caleb's play style is always going to lead to that. And so he does have to take responsibility. But I think one stat that is interesting from Next Gen Stats is that he was pressured in under 2.5 seconds on 11 dropbacks and sacked 7 times. And so those sacks, that was really coming very quickly. And so, yes, he was much better when he was getting the ball out more quickly. And he was really struggling and throwing the interceptions when he was holding the ball for longer than 2.5 seconds, which is that key, hey, he's trying to make the play out of structure. But I do think that there's an element to, when you look at that 2.5 second threshold, that's where you see that this is an offensive line issue also, which to me, it's you're not going to totally change your personnel at this point in the season. But I do want to say, hey, if you're Shane Waldron, their offensive coordinator, how can you scheme him a little more protection, knowing that it is going to take time for him to transition or at least mitigate his play style? And so that's something you knew when you drafted him. So how can you max protect some of the times? How can you provide that protection that allows him to get used to the play style? Well, maybe also, I know I kind of bashed Aaron Rodgers for not throwing beyond the sticks much this week, but for Caleb Williams, who's at a very different stage of his career than Aaron Rodgers, maybe try and really encourage him to make those kind of plays.
Yeah, look what Washington's doing with Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels, until the second half last week, they're just not having him throw the ball downfield at all. They just want to get the ball out because they have a terrible offensive line. And by the way, real quick, you know who had the most injured offensive line stats-wise in the last 20 years? It was the 2023 Texans. That's how good CJ Stroud was as a rookie, that he had a worse line probably than Caleb Williams has this year, but yet he played really, really well in spite of it. But yeah, it all plays together. And I think they're learning together. I think the Bears are just learning okay, it's 2 weeks. This is what we got to do week 3. This is what we got to do week 4. That's why I'm not worried about Caleb Williams at all. It's just an adjustment period for a rookie and for the coaching staff too, to figure out what he has to do.
Yeah. And I will say this, guys, that hey, yes, it's 2 weeks. Yes, I believe Caleb Williams is going to be a superstar. I also think that everything you just said, seeing ghosts, the term we become too familiar with when quarterbacks start to get hit, every quarterback reacts to that differently. I think Caleb's reaction to seeing ghosts is to run around and try and make something happen. There's some guys
and
you just
fall into bad habits, get ruined that way. There's no doubt about that.
And improving the protection around him will help some of this, but these problems are not new. These problems go all the way back to college. He's going to figure out how to take the easy plays that are right in front of him. All right. We got a couple other quarterbacks we want to break down that we're trying to figure out if we're bearish or bullish on with their new teams. We'll do that when we come back. Let's keep looking at some of the quarterbacks that we're trying to figure out if we're bullish or bearish on this season. And I want to start with a quarterback that I feel like the last couple of weeks I have just ripped apart at the seams every possible chance because he's played some of the stupidest football I can remember, and that's Will Levis. There's just no nice way to say anything about Will Levis. And if you don't believe me, listen to Brian Callahan, the head coach of the Titans, the new head coach of the Titans, when he was asked about Levis's backward pass at the press conference after the game. This is what he had to say.
What did you say to Will on the fumble? I know very upset on the sideline.
I think the camera caught it pretty clear, if I had to guess. So, yeah, I was upset. It was dumb. It was the same exact thing he did last week, and he cost us points in the red zone. And that is what it is. He's a grown-up, and he knows better. And so, I was really irritated that he cost us 3 points in a game that we probably needed it.
And you want to talk about blunt. A head coach with this new quarterback coming out and saying, like, they have a new relationship together, just laying it out there like they're Jori. I don't know. Like, I thought that was a bold, like, this is Brian Callahan saying, I will not handle stupidity well.
An important role of a coach is to understand what is going to get through to each of the players. And I think that he must think that this is going to get through to Will Levis. I don't think this was him getting emotional and putting emotion over reason in terms of what he thought was best. I do believe that he thinks that if Will Levis is like, oh yeah, that was dumb, like you need to drill that into the guy's mind, which also like there are much worse things someone can say than like that was a dumb play, when I think Will Levis would agree that that was a dumb play. One thing I liked about Brian Callahan's press conference as it went on is that Brian Callahan was not saying, don't throw it deep, don't throw it, be aggressive. He talked about Calvin Ridley's touchdown, which was an awesome play between Levis and Ridley, and was like, look, I'm fine being aggressive going down the field, but if we're going to do that, we can't just like throw it up when we're on the ground and be like, let's see if my team gets it. And so I do think that there is a distinction there between what he's willing to put up with.
I think that it's partially too, I'm not out on Levis yet because of this. We forget, because he did play some last year as a rookie. That was his 8th career start, if my math is right, on how many starts he had last year. He's going to make dumb mistakes still. And he's that kind of quarterback too, like going back to his college days and all that, as you've talked about, Fitz. And so, yes, there's some concern that just he's that guy who's just going to turn it over way too much, and you can't break that out of him. But I'm willing to give him a pass because it is 8 games. And what we have seen some good out of Will Levis. Like, it's not just a 0. Like, it is, okay, that's a really good play. Okay, don't try to flip the ball out and have Tyreek Stevenson return it for a game-ending touchdown, basically. Like, or don't, when you're going down against the Jets, throw it backwards and have it be a fumble that gets recovered. Like, he's got to get that out of his game. There's no question about that. But I think he's young enough in his development, he can do it. And I think Callahan, I think it was a great point, Jori, that every coach needs to know how to deal with their quarterbacks differently. Like, we've talked about this with Flores and Tua, that, look, you can't just be a blanket, like, I'm going to scream at everybody like Bobby Knight in 1981. Like, that doesn't work anymore. You need to have an idea of how players are going to react to everything. And I think the relationship between that coach and that quarterback has to be strong enough by now to know that, hey, I need to get on you a little bit. When he's coming off the sideline and Callahan screaming at him, what the F are you thinking? I don't know if he does that if Tua's his quarterback or somebody else. So I think that was a great point, Jori. And I think I'm willing to give Levis at least the season to see what he can do. And the Titans have to, too. They not like have any other options at this point.
I mean, wait. The Titans would be 2-0 if Will Levis could pull his head out of his ass long enough to play quarterback. Like, I mean, this comes a week after Brian Callahan flat out said, I think we would have won the game if we just punted on first down. Like, I hear you guys on the tough love, but let's also acknowledge the fact that, go back to Kentucky, watch the film of Kentucky against Vanderbilt, and Will Levis threw into triple coverage a couple of times that lost Kentucky a game they didn't have to lose. And I'm sitting there saying, man, this is the same Will Levis we saw in college. And the one thing I did hear from people that covered him at Kentucky and the people that knew him well in Kentucky is that mistakes stayed in his head. Like, they sort of got to him, and he lived with them, and he didn't do a good job of just eliminating that in his mindset and moving forward. So I see a coach that's ripping him for making the same mistakes for a quarterback that, at least in college, had a reputation for holding on to mistakes a long time. Like, I think that there's friction building. I hear you guys want to give this benefit of the doubt, and I appreciate how kind both of your hearts are. I give this no benefit of the doubt. I think Will Levis is a disaster at quarterback right now that's costing the Titans games. There's no nice way to say it.
Yeah, I disagree. I also just loved when Callahan was like, he's a grown-up. Like, it's almost this encouragement of like, Will, you know you're a grown-up. I know you're a grown-up. And so I want to trust you and I want to give you this. And like, it's almost one of those things where you say something like half like backhand compliment to try and encourage that. I really am not concerned. I think the funniest part of what Brian Callahan said was when he was talking about telling Will Levis, like, what the F was that? And he goes, I think the camera caught it pretty clear if I had to guess. Like, oh, if I had to guess, like, good job to the PR staff for telling him that was on camera. But like, you didn't guess that was on camera. Come on now, like, be honest with us. I don't know. I think that the difference between like a Bryce Young situation and a Will Levis situation is when you look at the Will Levis to Calvin Ridley pass, like, he is showing the ability to do some of these things at this level. And I mean, think Jameis Winston, like the ceiling can be super high. And so I think that because Will Levis can kind of lean into those plays, you're saying like, I need to encourage that aggressiveness on the big armed plays that you're capable of making. And so I need to instill that capacity for nuance into your head of, I should be aggressive, but in order to earn that opportunity, I can't do it when I'm like falling down.
Yeah, and I think Fitz, one thing real quick, I mean, you said like they should be 2-0. To me, that's almost a positive. Look, the Titans aren't going anywhere this year. They're just not. Like, I'm sorry, Titans fans. You're not a playoff team yet. But I think the fact that if you want to get really like, and me, you know me, the eternal optimist, that if you want to get that way, you could say, look, Will Levis played well enough in most of the game that we could have beat the Bears on the road and the Jets at home, and those are two really, really good defenses. If he eliminates some mistakes, we actually have something here that we could beat good defenses like that. It's not, again, like not to just drag Bryce Young again, but it's not a Bryce Young situation where you're like, oh my God, he can't play. You're like, well, Will Levis cuts these mistakes out. We're playing well enough to beat the Bears and beat the Jets. And I think that can be a positive going forward. Again, they have the entire year to figure this out. It's not like they're going to bench Will Levis, or they shouldn't anyway, unless it just becomes unbearable for them. It's not like they have anything in reserve. Like this is the year to figure out what you got with Will Levis, and then you kind of reset things and move forward to 2025.
It sounds like we greatly differ, but we don't. The one thing we differ on is I don't believe these mistakes will be pushed away. I think they're part of the nature of Jameis. They're part of the nature of Jeff George, to be an old guy reference for a minute. And I think they're part of the nature of Will Levis. Thank you. I'm pulling a Jeff George reference. Only podcast in America doing that today. Let's look at their opponents, though, the Jets and Aaron Rodgers. Jori, I was a little surprised. Like, I thought that as much as we sort of forgave the Jets for looking, let's say, out of sync week one, I really thought week two against the Titans, we would see a different version of the Jets. It still looks a little out of sync to me.
I think what my problem with them was, like, yes, they won. Yes, they kind of figured things out a little bit in the fourth quarter. But when we were talking about a Caleb Williams or a Jaden Daniels, give them quick passes. Give them, like, right around the line of scrimmage passes at the beginning of their career to get used to this level. Aaron Rodgers is decades into his NFL career. I don't want that to be primarily what he's doing. I understand that there are benefits to it and that one of Aaron's talents is just his ability to get the ball out so quickly and sort of like mess with the defense that you can use that as an advantage. I don't think the Jets traded a lot and paid him a lot to specifically be throwing passes. I mean, I'll show it for anyone who's got this camera. I tracked all the air yards because I'm obnoxious like that. And it's like -6, -1, 0, 6, 3, 7, -5 were his completions. His first 15 completions, the only one that went for over 10 air yards was a 26-yard pass to Breece Hall, which, by the way, they had that conversation because Rodgers was kind of like playing with the play clock, so they had to call a timeout. And then Breece was like, I matched up on a linebacker, throw it to me in the end zone, which, like, shout out to Breece for saying that. And I think that Rodgers is just capable of so much more. If you wanted to get the rust off of him in week one because he's returning from an Achilles injury, I understand that. But I think as you continue on with this season, you need him to do more than that. And maybe I'm just being too harsh of a critic because they won the game and he figured out when they needed to, and like, you're not going to be at your best at every moment. But I think to me, it wasn't that he was looking bad throwing downfield. It was that he was barely attempting to throw downfield. And I also think we talk so much about receivers in this league needing to get involved and needing to stay confident. And Aaron Rodgers said this after the game, but like, you got to keep Garrett Wilson involved and you got to establish that rapport in September, October, November, so that when you really want to make that run to the playoffs and into the playoffs, you and Garrett Wilson are not trying to figure things out for the first time then.
I think this is all going to be fine. I really do. Maybe just because I'm still holding out to the Jets being a good team. But I think a big part of this is the receivers. Like you talked about, Garrett Wilson's all he got right now. And Mike Williams, they've already said he's on the Breece Hall plan from last year, where first month, he ain't going to play much. By October, we'll start ramping him up. Mike Williams, obviously, former Chargers receiver coming off the ACL. He could be a difference maker downfield. When you're talking about those air yards, like, who are you throwing downfield to if it's not Garrett Wilson, who everybody knows he's getting the ball? I'm not feeling comfortable throwing deep to Allen Lazard most of the game. So a lot of this is running backs are involved, or even Tyler Conklin here and there, and Garrett Wilson getting open when he can, because they just don't have a number two guy right now. I think Mike Williams can be that guy. They're being super safe with him. They saw it work really well with Breece Hall last year. So I'm willing to give them a pass. Again, a tough scheduling situation where you go from Monday night to a road game to a Thursday night game. So it's not going to look pretty on Thursday night either for this offense. But I think as the season goes on, they will figure things out and they'll be fine. Yeah,
by the way, guys, Aaron Rodgers only has 31 completions for the first two games. That's one game of what we're used to from Aaron Rodgers. Through two games, 31 of 51. And 17 targets to Garrett Wilson, only 10 catches. Again, 10 catches could be a good game for Garrett Wilson. So I think we have to sort of acknowledge that this is just the slow start to what the Jets have to hope avalanches throughout the course of the year. So I think it's all going to work itself out. Let's look at a positive situation. What about the Falcons? Because obviously the Falcons, the sky was falling week 1. Well, then they get an incredible win week 2. Offense looks completely different, Jori. Like this was a reimagining of what the Falcons were going to look like week 2 after what we saw in week 1.
Yeah, I think what I liked is that after week 1, you had all this. Is Kirk actually healthy? Can he be mobile? He had like the fewest yards per drop back in terms of his movement in the pocket in week 1 in his career since they were starting to track it. And you had all these questions. And then you go to week 2 and it's like, oh, okay, he can move. He can do play action. He can get out of the pocket. He's going to be fine. Bijan Robinson is really, really talented. He's got different receivers. He's getting involved. Drake London made a great play on the end, which, by the way, like on that game-winning touchdown, I guess they had to steal with the interception. Drake London kind of was like, I think I know what Darius Slay is expecting me to do because of my tendencies, and so I'm going to do the opposite. So there's some mental games being played there too. And I think when I look at it, I was in Philadelphia for that game, and I was not thinking during that game at any point, oh, is Michael Penix Jr. going to be playing this season? And that's really what the Falcons should want. Obviously, that's not the be-all, end-all. They want to go deep into the playoffs. But I think that part of this was establishing Kirk as a quarterback early in the season, and so you don't have to deal with that controversy. And Michael Penix, to his credit, I talked to him in the locker room, great dude, and was like super happy for all of them. I think that the other thing that was super interesting to me is, I don't know if you guys saw the clip that C-Rob tweeted out from the Manning cast when Matt Ryan was talking about how when he would switch teams, the 2-minute drill was one of his favorite things because the 2-minute drill is like fairly consistent no matter what scheme you're in, staple plays, you know what you're doing. And so for Kirk Cousins to be able to say like, hey, this is not something scheme dependent that I'm learning for the first year. I'm going to go into autopilot on this drive. But I do think that the Falcons really have a belief level in him that they did not have before Monday night. The downside, they have the Kansas City Chiefs coming this week, so we'll see what that does for them.
I think you guys would be way too positive on the Falcons coming out of week 2 because
come on.
If Saquon Barkley catches that pass, what conversation are we having about the Falcons? We're having a conversation that they've scored exactly 2 touchdowns in 2 weeks. Now, obviously, Kirk gets the second chance, does a lot with it, but like you said, Jori, like, that's 2 minute drill. He finally felt a little bit comfortable and let it fly a little bit.
But NFL games come down to that all the time. So being able to execute that matters.
It does. It absolutely does. And they could springboard this to something better, but you can't run the 2-minute drill all the time. Like in their functional drive-to-drive offense, they were pretty bad until the end of that game. And look, I have to write a game story that pops up on Yahoo.com immediately after the game is done. And until the moment Saquon Barkley dropped that pass, the entire story was, this Falcons offense still isn't right. They only scored 1 touchdown tonight. Kirk Cousins looked better, but he don't look great. And so does one drive change all of that? Maybe again, Kirk's got to knock the rust off and all this kind of stuff. But I give him less of a honestly, I give him less of a pass than I do Caleb Williams or Bo Nix or whoever, because he has done this for so long. There shouldn't be that much of an adjustment period. I get the injury, I get the age. I'm still a little concerned about the Falcons reaching the levels we thought they could reach. No, they needed that win so bad. 1-1 is so much better than 0-2. But I'm still not on this train of the Falcons have figured it all out. I think they had one good drive. And again, maybe that's momentum, but there's still a lot of work to do in Atlanta because I'm looking at the first 59 minutes of that game saying they really were not good.
I think both of you are sort of right, though, because to me, seeing an offensive coordinator come in and reimagine the way they're going to do it, increasing the percentage of dropbacks that come from under center, increasing the amount of play action is a real acknowledgement from Atlanta. Hey, week 1, we were keeping him in shotgun and pistol. It wasn't working. Now we're going to ease into this offense. I think there is a little bit of an adjustment period, especially for, as I always say, a quarterback that's so old that he basically used to write plays on a stone tablet that's coming off of an Achilles injury. He's got to leave the walker on the sideline so he can go out and play football. There is some element of all of this that I think gives there's a little bit of grace. I think both of you are right, even though both of you are also wrong. How do you like that?
Yeah, wow.
Okay,
I don't even know how to react to that.
I'm really interested, Frank, in you saying that the Falcons didn't play well because I think that they didn't look like a finished product. Yes, 3rd down, 2 of 9, they need to be better. Red zone, 1 of 3, and obviously it was only that last play at the end that they got there. That said, they had 385 yards of offense. They were moving the ball well. They were running the ball well, which I think is going to be very sustainable.
Yeah, Bijan looked great. I'll give you that.
I think that they were very productive. They just have a few of those areas, 3rd down and red zone, that they need to be better in. But I don't think they played badly as an offense. I thought they played quite well, but there were just key areas that were not enough.
Yeah, I thought they were okay. Like, again, Bijan was awesome. Like, Bijan is the one
last
thing
time
out
you
of this
said they
offense.
didn't play well. Now, okay, so let's keep going. And by the end of this, Frank's going to have number one.
I was
as
both
power
right
rankings.
and wrong, and maybe right and maybe wrong. Who knows?
Two
But
things can
Bijan
be
looked
true.
great. I'm
We're
talking
right
about,
and we're wrong.
Kirk in the first half had 75 yards passing, and Drake London got the 54 yards at the end because of the last drive, and Kyle Pitts is still 20 yards, and it's all like, okay, well, there's nothing dynamic about this offense yet. Look, they'll probably get better, I assume, but I just want to see more. And like you said,
but the team had 184 yards of offense in the first half, so Kirk wasn't passing a lot, but they were moving, and I'm okay with that.
Bijan was great. Bijan's really good.
I don't care how they get the yards if they get them.
Interesting. And just run it. This is Bijan at 40 carries a game. Let's go.
Frank being both right and wrong is exactly what happens when he puts out his power rankings. The power rankings are out by Frank Schwab at Yahoo Sports. We're going to react to some of the biggest risers and fallers. We'll do that next. Frank, I pray for your menchies every week when you do your power rankings, just because it feels like nobody's ever going to be happy. So let's break down some of these, because you had some big changes this week. Like, you went fully dramatic. Like, this is a full turn of events. I don't even know how to summarize some of it. Like, you took the Saints from 22 to 12. Like, what are we doing, Frank? Like, just one win, all of a sudden, willy-nilly, you're just changing the whole process?
I mean, some people were arguing with me the Saints should be top 5. And it's see, here's a problem. Let me discuss this real quick. I've talked about it a little bit.
Can you explain to us how you do your power rankings?
Exactly.
Like, what is your system?
Thank you. Thank you for opening that up, Jori. I appreciate that. I look at this different than I think everybody else does. I do not read other power rankings because I don't want to get sucked into groupthink. I don't want to see everybody else have the Saints number 4 in their power rankings and be like, oh, I got them too low at 12. I want to do this totally organically. This is how I feel about these teams. I think I do it differently than everybody else because, again, Fitz, I'm a dabbler, right? I look at this from the mind of a gambler, and people are like, how on earth could you have the Ravens at 0-2 at number 8? Well, it's because I think the Ravens are still a pretty good football team. They just blew a game against the Raiders and lost at the Chiefs. That's not a big deal. Where does BetMGM have the Ravens in their Super Bowl odds? 7th best odds. So I look at it, and I didn't consult that before. I looked at it after, but I think I look at this as a gambler. Like, I'm not giving up on the Baltimore Ravens because they lost to the Raiders. Like, it's a 1-game sample size here. We have 2 games in the books. And for the Saints specifically, one of their 2 games came against the 33rd best team in the NFL, the Carolina Panthers. So, yeah, they blew out the Cowboys, but what do I really make of this? I try not to move too far off of my preseason rankings because there's a lot of data points involved in that by 2 weeks. And some teams I do. Some teams, the injuries especially, the Dolphins move way down. Rams have moved way down. Saints have moved up. Like, Saints are being number 12. I was really low on them coming into the season. Maybe they are good, but I'm not completely scrapping everything. And for any power rankings out there, the ones I have seen through the years, that'll just have like, well, all 6 2-0 teams, or however many we have, all 6 2-0 teams are 1 through 6 in my power rankings. That's a waste of time. Like, I can look at the NFL standings. I could do that. Like, that's really not that hard. My power rankings are a lot different in that I don't care if this team is 0-2. What's the context? What's the past? What are the other data points? Sometimes I'll move them way up. Sometimes I'll move them way down. But the Ravens, I think the Ravens are 8th best team in football. And I don't have a problem with that at 0-2. The Patriots are 1-1. The Ravens are 0-2. Would you guys pick the Patriots to beat the Ravens on a neutral field tomorrow? I know I wouldn't. So, I mean, that's kind of how it goes. I don't just go by
I really think we have to
rank.
put an asterisk on the Ravens' loss to the Chiefs because I understand it will count toward their playoff concerns, but like that they looked like they could go toe-to-toe with the defending champions who they'll probably face deep into the playoffs again.
And 1-game sample sizes are one of
literally toe-to-toe. That is what they want.
I know that
like toe. Well done.
I know that we have to like take games, the results of games that matter. Obviously, I get that, all that. But 1-game sample sizes are not the be-all, end-all. Like, do we think the 85 Dolphins are better than the 85 Bears? Like, they beat them, right? Like, so the 85 Dolphins have to be better than 85 Bears. No, that's not how it works.
But you did only move Dallas down 2 spots after Dallas got shellacked. Like,
right. And
was there a part of that that was like,
hard.
ooh, Dallas got the...
I got so much heat for that. And trust me, I've read most of the mentions. I shouldn't say all of them, but most.
Explain why, though, because what I would say is that I agree that 1 game, like, you can get lost by 1 game. But the problem is if you're talking about like betting and what the Cowboys are able to do going forward, for at least 4 years now, since their first playoff exit to the 49ers a few years ago, not their second one the next year, we have seen that this defense has not been able to handle the Shanahan scheme, have not been able to handle those kind of runners. And I think that when you look at that, well, then you should project that to continue the issue. I mean, they do that with Arizona last year, with Green Bay in the playoffs. They're going to have to face San Francisco again if they want to get anywhere. And so I think that, to me, the reason that I would be more concerned about the Cowboys than what you are is because, like, I don't think that they're going to have an answer the next time they face a scheme like this. When I was asking someone about this on Monday, I was like, what would you do if you're the Cowboys defensive coordinator? Because yes, it's a new issue this season, but it's not a new issue. This defense has struggled against this type of system for so long. And the person told me, they're like, look, the Cowboys are athletic and rangy and built to play that way rather than the, like, beefy stop the run up the middle. And also they're built to play from ahead because of their pass rush. And so I think, to me, like, if you can't fix that problem this season, you can't go where you want to go.
And I do agree with all that. Like, they do have trouble with the Shanahan scheme. But I still, when you look at the Cowboys, to me, you look at a team that's won 12 games each of the past 3 years. There's a good reason for that. They still have a lot of that talent on board. And week one, they blasted the Browns. Like, I don't think the Browns are a bad football team. They absolutely blasted them. So how do you judge the Cowboys now? We've had one game where they look awesome, one game where they looked absolutely terrible. Am I supposed to weigh the second game more than the first game because it happened more recently? Like, this is hard. Like, look, doing power rankings is not hard. My dad drove a truck his entire life. That's hard. Like, I'd rank football teams every Monday. It's really not that hard, but it is a challenge when you only have 2 games and you're like, well, the Raiders beat the Ravens. How could I rank the Ravens ahead of the Raiders? And and you're dealing with...
I do think, though, that there's fairness to saying, hey, if these two teams faced each other 10 times on a neutral field, who would I bet on?
And that's what I do.
I think if we were looking fairly, even as a Raiders fan, if we were looking fairly at the Raiders-Ravens 10 times on a neutral field, I don't think the Raiders win that game 7 or 8 out of those 10. I don't think they win it, 5 or 6 out of those 10. Like, I think, so I totally hear you on that. The Dolphins fell from 9 to 23. Was that just because Tua for you?
Just Tua. You have to almost view teams how they are now. I dropped the Packers probably way too much. I mean, they did look pretty good last week with Malik Willis somehow. But yes, I have to look at the Dolphins being, this is Skylar Thompson. And I don't think Skylar or Ryan Tannehill or whoever they're going to get, Tyler Huntley, I think they got off the practice squad somewhere. I don't think these guys are going to be able to support this offense over long term. They'll win some games still. They'll be competitive and feisty because they're really well coached and got a lot of talent. But Tyreek's not going for 1,800 yards with Skylar Thompson as his quarterback. Like Jalen Waddle, we've seen this. We've seen Skylar Thompson play some games, and that offense kind of shrunk. Obviously so. Tua's a really, really good quarterback. So yeah, the Dolphins it sucks. Like, I hate it. I hate that the Dolphins are looking at their season already saying, well, it's kind of over. Like, I don't think we're going to rally and win the AFC East with Skylar Thompson as our quarterback, but you got to be realistic about where they are right now.
Jori, how is the league react? Like, so this is, let's dive into Tua for a second, because for me, when I talked to Talia, his brother, a couple of years ago, right after the head injuries, one thing Talia made clear is that the family sits down and the family talks about the medical, and Tua talks about the medical, and everything that they were going to do moving forward was something they'd be comfortable with because of the doctors and the family decision. And I feel like what happens right now is a lot of people in front of a microphone are screaming, well, Tua needs to retire. That's not our place to decide. Like, that's between Tua and the team and their doctors. And they're actually talking to doctors, not a bunch of idiots with a microphone in front of them, their faces. So, like, I look at it and say, man, if Tua is sitting down with his family and his doctors and they're saying, hey, no, you can play, go ahead. And the team is sitting down with their doctors and saying, no, he can play. Who am I to tell him he can't? But if you're around the league, how do you look at this point when it has become glaringly an issue that's never going to go away?
Right. I think what's challenging is, like, imagine being the Seattle Seahawks, had Tua played this week, and being Adam Dirty, their defensive coordinator, and being like, hey, I need you guys to go crush this man. I don't want to be the one who sends Tua back to that fencing response. I don't even want to watch that as, like, I don't know about a fan, but I don't even want to watch that as someone who consumes NFL content. And I think that the issue is, okay, that's my choice whether to watch it. That's someone else's choice whether to hit it. I don't like it, but it's not up to me. The one I think about is the Philadelphia Eagles have a tight end, Grant Calcaterra. He caught the first pass of the game on Monday night against the Falcons. And when Grant was playing for Oklahoma, I believe he had 3 diagnosed concussions. Doctors said don't play anymore. Oklahoma said don't play anymore. He retired, got his emergency medical training, was all set to go become a firefighter or something in that field, and then was like, no, I really want to play football. Another doctor said he could. He played for SMU, and now 3 years later, he's still on the Eagles. he got a concussion last year and that didn't stop him. I'm not here to judge what Grant Calcaterra's decision was because it's not up to me. Like, I don't have to like it, and I don't have to believe that health was the first thing that was factoring into some of these decisions. Or like, I always say my mom gave me a healthy appreciation of like what could go wrong. I also think that like if these guys are doing what they love, like my dad was asking me last night, oh, is Tua going to keep playing because of the money, because he loves the game, because of something else? I don't think it's the money that's keeping him there. I do not think money is fueling this decision. I understand there's a lot of money on the table. Quite frankly, there's a lot of money on the table for him whether he plays or not. But I think if he believes he could do it in a healthy manner, he's going to keep doing it. And I guess I've changed my stance a little bit since Thursday night. And I was really surprised because the people who were coming out saying, Tua, you need to retire, were like Richard Sherman and people like that. Like, these were not people who were just sitting at home never having played the game. These were some of the most physical players across the league and league history who were saying, like, you really need to think about this. But it doesn't really matter what we think. It matters what Tua, his family, and the Dolphins think. And so I think what I would say, though, is I do believe that the Dolphins should have some sort of structure in place of what he can and can't do. Of you have to slide if you're going to. I understand you can't have a guy playing nervous, but I do think you have to at least save him from himself a little bit in terms of the play style, if not from the actual play.
I'd also honestly, really, I don't know why Tua wasn't wearing a Guardian cap. Like I haven't seen many guys wearing them, but why not? Like maybe he can't turn his head quick, and I don't know. Like I haven't heard that answered, but I do think, you know, with all the Tua should retire stuff, it does come from a place of sympathy. We don't want to see Tua in a bad place in 20 years or 2 years even. We want the people, Richard Sherman, Tony Gonzalez, all that. I think it comes from a place of Tua, we just want what's best for you. The one thing and you kind of touched on this a little bit, Jori. The one thing that really does upset me when we see fans talk about this or whatever, and please do not do this. Do not have this in your head. The people who say, well, Tua gets $91 million if he retires, so he's fine. There's no big deal. There's so much more to life than money. Tua Tagovailoa has been playing quarterback, I'm going to guess, since he was 6 years old. He has dreamed of going to a major college, which he did with Alabama, dreamed of being a first-round pick, which he was, but dreamed of being a quarterback for his entire career, winning Super Bowls, winning MVP maybe someday, going to Hall of Fame, so whatever it is, he's had these dreams. And to just say, well, you got paid, you're fine, that's not all that is to life. Like, there's something in Tua that he loves football. You don't get this far as a professional athlete if you don't want to be great. He wants to be great at what he does. You don't want to give that up when you're, I think he's 27. Is that how old he is? Like, you don't want to just walk away from that. If he does, fine. And I respect that. But just because he has money doesn't mean that his love of football goes away, and the dreams he wanted to, succeed at in the NFL, that doesn't just go away because you have money. You still want to play this game you love and compete, and he still sees it as, I can still play for 10 years. I just don't want to get more concussions. So please get that out of your vernacular of he'll be fine. He's got money like that.
Yeah, and I think
more
on that. I think on that note of money, it's interesting because Dak Prescott sometimes takes flack because he says, I don't play for the money. And then people are like, then why did you need $60 million a year in this contract? Why didn't you take a discount? And I think what he means by that, even if it's not exactly what he's saying, is I don't play primarily for the money. Yeah, I'll take the money. Yeah, I'll get what's competitive.
You should. And
if you were to, yeah, right. Totally fair for him to do that.
Two things could be true. Yes.
Yes. But if you were to tell Dak, you can go drive a truck for $80 million a year. Respect to your dad for driving the truck. It's just not necessarily what Dak wants. If you can go, if Dak could take $80 million a year to go do a different job or $60 million to play football, like, he's not going to stop doing this for the sake of football because football has provided him a piece from the tragedy of his life in different ways. And so I think for Tua, obviously some of his trauma is coming on the actual field, but there is something to be said of like, yes, the money is obviously very compelling, but I think these guys are not going to leave for something more lucrative because of how much they love this game.
I would also say, like, look, I chose my out of the music business. I chose when I no longer wanted to be a part of the music business. The music business did not choose my end. So I've had no regrets about walking away from the music business. One of my dearest friends was in one of the biggest bands in the world. And one of the hardest things in his life, he said repeatedly, is waking up in your early 20s and realizing that your run is done. You've made a lifetime worth of money, and now you have no purpose. You no longer know what to do with your life every single day. And everybody sits there and says, must be nice to have all that money. It is. Like, that's fine. It changes some things, but it doesn't change the fact that you're 25, 26, 27 years old, and you're looking around and what you've trained for your entire life is no longer an option for you. Nobody wants you to do it anymore. You don't get to do it anymore. And you get lost and you just spend years trying to figure out what your actual purpose in life is. I think people undervalue how difficult the mental health aspect of not being able to do what you do or what you love. Like that moment is so crushing for so many people. This isn't about money for Tua, because it doesn't have to be about money for Tua. It's about what it feels like to be part of the game every single day, and the joy that you get from that and the purpose you have from it. It's like a purpose-driven life for so many people. So, Frank, I hear you on that. Before we get out of here, Thursday night football, New England taking on the Jets. The Jets favored by 6.5 as we sit right now. So far, Frank has picked both games right. Jori and I got off the schneid last week. We've each got last week's game. Jori, you will be there live. So, any picks? New England at the Jets. Frank, who do you got?
I hope we're picking against the spread, because all of us are going to pick the Jets, right? Like I don't think the Patriots
we'll put the
are going in there.
This one's 6.5. Yeah, 6.5. They win it by 6.5.
I am going to, because I'm so dug in on the Jets, I'll take them to win and cover. I just think that I just have a hard time buying into the Patriots, and I'm sorry. Like, I know they've played well, they've played hard, they've been much, much better than I thought, but I still do not buy the Patriots being able to go to the Jets and compete in this game and make it close. I just think the Jets kind of win this kind of ugly 20-10 type of game.
Jori?
Yeah, I definitely think the Jets. I think the Patriots will be feistier than we expected, especially because, again, if Aaron Rodgers is not willing to kind of throw downfield a little bit more, I think the Patriots can do something with that, but I expect the Jets to win.
Do you think the Jets will win by a touchdown? We're trying to turn you into a degenerate here.
I know, right? We're going to have to explain
I'll say no. I think they win by under 6.5.
Now this puts me as the tiebreaker on this one. Oh, man. This is dangerous. I'm with Jori. I think this is a closer game. I haven't seen enough to trust the offense. So I will take, although I think the Jets win the game, I think the Patriots cover. So this could, Frank could be running away with this at this point. This could turn into an ugly victory. All right. We're going to be back, obviously, Friday. Charles will be sitting in with us. You can follow us on social media. You know that. Be sure to give Stone, our producer behind the scenes, some love, too, because he does God's work putting these episodes together. Rate, review, subscribe. It's important. If you give us a review, it means a lot in this process. If you've listened this far, my God, just go give us a review. It means everything. We really appreciate it. And in the meantime, tell your friends, your family, your enemies. Tell everybody. Tell the people you hate in your life. Tell the people you love. Basically, tell anybody you've ever met to hang out with us every single Sunday night, every single Wednesday, every single Friday. What?
Even if you haven't met them, that's okay.
This
is a good opportunity to meet new people.
Not?
People on the streets, just stop them and say, do you listen to Inside Coverage? We appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Have a great week.